Well, hey, welcome everybody to our live. It's been a bit, Steven. It's been like a few weeks, I think, since we last came on, and we're continuing our series on the cultural web model.
Yeah.
We've talked about stories, we've talked about rituals and routines. We've talked about just morale and just the different things that contribute to just culture overall. We talked about symbols. There's a lot that goes into culture, and so this week we're going to be digging into organizational structures, and I'm kind of excited about this one. I was thinking about it quite a bit because, like, if you were to do a root cause on challenges with an org, you probably can point back to some facet that's connected to or part of the organizational structure. So I'm really excited to dig into this. Before we get rolling, a little bit of housekeeping. This is our opinion. Does not represent past, current, or future organizations. We're just here to have a good Chinwag discussion, build community, be challenged by people that are participating with us. So if you're on and you have questions or thoughts, please pop them in chat. If you're on LinkedIn, we can't reply back. But if you're on YouTube, and you're on Facebook, this is our first time on Facebook, Steven.
Yeah, pretty excited about that.
A beautiful, amazing wife just responded from
the number Facebook. One fan.
Number one fan. Like, she's here like almost every time. I was giving her a hard time with them. Like, hey, like, wait a second. Like, you're supposed to be there every time, right? But that's cool that she's replying from Facebook. That's pretty cool. This is our first time in that space, man. So organizational structures, like, just to break it down, like, simply hierarchy, right? Like, decisions made at the top all the way down. Autocracy. One person, I say, you do, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Holacracy. Like, when I say that word, Steven, I almost think about like it's like the name of a sitcom or something.
Holacracy. I could see that.
Right? Like, I feel like attempts at holacracy could probably be made into some kind of show. Right. And I've heard about organizations trying that, where, like, you just have a purely flat, right, model within an organization, and then, like, you go down from there, and it's about decision making, which I hope we can dig into a little bit today as we get into this conversation. But for you, like, thinking about our audience, right, which are just leaders who want to consume this information and who might be navigating, like, the complexities of these types of organizational structures, like, what do you want to offer to kick us off?
I'm really curious to see where the discussion is going to go today, just because I know that you're really excited to talk about org structures, where traditionally
I don't know if that's exciting for everybody else, though.
Because for me, it's actually one of the least exciting parts of the cultural web model.
Oh, okay.
Even though, like, I've used org charts as a symbol, right, and a ritual.
Oh, like the upside down pyramid.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm really curious to see kind of where your excitement lies in this, because one of the biggest reasons is that, yes, org charts are very much a symbol that show positional power and decision-making authority, but oftentimes they can be superseded by culture. Like, if people say this is a matrixed organization, or this is a flat organization, right, or a federated organization, the org chart can become somewhat meaningless. And also, I would say, more often than not, I have not had full control over my organizational chart in a lot of
roles. Is that a youth problem, Steven, or an organizational problem?
I would normally say that it's a me problem, but I attempted many a times in my career to switch my org chart around. And it's just amazing sometimes the hoops that you have to jump to make those changes, right? Sure. And so sometimes for me, the org chart itself has become not, the juice that's not worth the squeeze.
Sure.
Oftentimes there's, like, faster ways to move about getting things done from an operational perspective. And so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, Brian, as to the org chart and why you're excited about it.
Well, I like reading textbooks, so I don't know if I'm, like, the best person to to talk about this, but I I think it's one thing to have an organizational chart on paper, right? But it's another thing to actually see what's being lived out. I think it absolutely connects to our next conversation, which is around power and how power is distributed within an organization. I think the reason why it's fascinating to me is I think organizational charts, org charts for like an inexperienced or poor or not mature leader can be actually abused, right? So like
Totally.
I'm above you, so therefore, it could be it could really create a lot of conflict and tension in an organization. And I've seen many times where that happens, but it's the org chart's almost pointed back to as a way to defend, right? Like, well, this is how we're structured, so therefore it's okay to have an I say you do, right, type of an approach, especially when it comes to like hierarchy.
Yeah.
I've experienced like hierarchical. This is like the comment that you made around culture being um, your operating system,
Yeah.
right, and your structure being, um, in conflict or potentially not aligned to that. I've seen where like you have a hierarchical culture, but then how people operate is matrix and vice versa, and it can lead to a lot of tension and conflict.
Yeah.
But what's even more fascinating to me is, and this is where it gets, I think, a little complex, and I wrote this down. You have um, you have your organizational structure, you have your cultural norms, right, that are in place that are either aligned or not, and that can create a lot of strife and struggle in an organization. But even further, you have substructures and subcultures, right? So you could have a hierarchical organization, and maybe you have 5 leaders that run your main lines of business, and they could all be running their own org structure, and they could also be running their own culture within that. And so I think that's the power of the cultural web model. If you're not taking time to inventory what's going on, like you could have misalignment where you have one part of your organization that's, hey, I want to empower my people. I trust you to lead from your seats to make decisions. And just over the hill, right, you have it's locked down, right? All decisions must flow through, right? The highest power, the highest authority.
For
Like
sure.
so when your people compare notes, right? What is that like? That creates a lot of challenges. It creates issues with attrition and retention. It creates challenges with uh, reputation, right, as an organization. And so I think it seems maybe kind of vanilla on the surface, but how it's actioned can really be. I think it's a root cause again for a lot of challenges that organizations come across, and leaders come across.
Yeah, it makes me think of what I would consider to be a rather immature or unhealthy um, culture and hierarchy is one in which there's an inner crowd that has all of the influence.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Despite the fact that there's individuals who it's their job to be competent in a very specific area of an organization. Right. But they're not necessarily empowered to run the strategy of their organization. And I know that happens all the time.
Or they're put in a position of influence, and it's like definitely not the right group.
Yeah.
But in a position of influence, right? They're savvy at, I think, selling their work and their lines of business, but not necessarily right for where the organization wants to go.
Yeah.
I was talking with not within my current organization. I was talking with somebody, and they said, my organization is so hierarchical, but yet we're so directionless.
I feel that just almost like a visceral reaction. I know exactly what they mean by that.
Yeah. So like when you have that org chart, which is interesting because most org charts are hierarchical. So visually, right, the symbolism is top down,
Yeah.
but maybe your organization doesn't want to be that way, and that can create some confusion as well. But I think it's very interesting, especially for a new leader, right, to come in and trying to find their way and their place in the world,
Yeah.
and having that conflict, I think play out. I think can really be really tough.
Yeah, and I mean, as a leader who I would say probably underplays their authority more than I probably should. Um, there are protections in place that a hierarchy allows for a leader to ultimately protect their people. And we're going to be talking about decision making authority, and I think it boils down to that a lot of times. I mean, we talked about how I flip the org chart upside down because I want people to be able to own their work and ultimately be in charge of their scope and lean on their management more and more for advocacy and empowerment to be able to do their jobs as best as possible, right? And creating those feedback loops and those channels for communication. But if you were to break this down into a RACI diagram, right? And for those that don't know, a RACI diagram is a way that you can take all the people in the room and all the tasks involved with a particular scope of work and decide who's responsible, who's accountable, who do you consult, and who do you inform. There's one rule about RACIs, and that there can only be, or there should only be, one person who's accountable for certain things. So when stuff goes really, really wrong, who do you look to?
Exactly.
And an org chart can help define that, I think, because ultimately you can make your whole entire team responsible for a scope of work under your purview as a leader, but when push comes to shove, you're accountable. And there are times where even if you've done everything that you possibly could to empower your team, sometimes there are variables that get in the way or uncertainties that get in the way that make for an uncomfortable conversation where it takes some extreme ownership of the outcomes of a situation, right? And it's still on the leader to own that. And a mature leader will own that accountability, even if their team did 99% of the work. And I think a healthy leader who has strong personal power and is aware of their positional power can use the org chart as a means of protection for their people.
Sure. Yeah. Protection for them or protection for their people?
For their people. If you're at the top of the org chart, there's expectations of your decision-making authority and your ability to lead your team to delivery, right? And sometimes your team does everything that they can, and maybe they misdeliver on something. But ultimately, that leader at the top of the org chart can own that, protect their people if they're really giving it their best efforts, and then sort of reevaluate how they do it differently the next time.
One of my like dreams, like that I've I thought about for a while now, as it relates to just organizational development and leadership, is to build a kind of a purely strengths based organization, right? Where we look at our people and what they're really, really good at and put them in places to succeed.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's an org structure, but I wonder if it could be, right? I wonder if you could have, maybe that's holacracy. I don't know, but I think like strongocracy.
I mean, I think leaders should be hyper aware of different styles, right? Different styles and strengths. I know there's a time, and Brian and you and I worked together for about a decade now. But traditionally, in most of the roles that I've worked in, I would say 85 to 90% of the people that work for me are very analytical thinkers. And I would deliberately try to hire, especially in very influential leadership positions, my extroverted integrators, right? Like the people that really enjoy the people work.
Yeah,
Because for analytical leaders, that was not their favorite thing.
sure.
And I think it's really important to understand the balance of strengths and team dynamics across your team, because you do need individuals who collaborate, who integrate, who stabilize, right, who make decisions to be truly effective.
Yeah, I was sharing with somebody the other day. Um, Over my past leadership roles, my teams have been introverted folks, and I've been an extrovert, and it's been really helpful for me to have a translator, on teams as well, that can like help me speak that language. And then you help me too, because that's your space of comfort is introversion. And I said to somebody the other day, I'm like, I'm the guy that turns around on the elevator and says hello to everybody. But I wonder, like, to your point, like, I think I can't think people can use the org chart to protect people, but I think it also can be used as a crutch.
Oh, totally.
Right.
Yeah.
For to make it things easier. And I think there's a duality there. I think that it can help, right, create clarity in terms of where you go, right, to escalate certain things, and where you go to, run something that might be risky by folks. But I also think it can, to the opposite of what you shared, it can be used to consolidate power and consolidate information. I've seen situations where if you didn't have a title, right, a certain title, you weren't in the room, and there can be a lot of challenges with that, especially as it relates to succession planning, right, and growth and development. If you think about this from a pure like human resources HR standpoint, like your org chart defines, right, how you might design your succession. Right? Your succession planning should be a direct reflection of that body of work. And so I think there can be like a plus and a minus, right, to how all organizational charts work. And I think we can easily come back to this idea that we talked about when we first started, and that's, is your org structure in conflict with your culture, or is your org structure defining and driving and reinforcing the culture that you want to have in place, or is it working against it? And if it's working against it, man, sometimes it can make people feel crazy.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I think of building a house, right? You'd have your foundation in order. You'd have your studs 16 to 24 inches apart, right? And I think about that saying, what is it? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
Oh man, you
I
went there.
But I think, if I were to frequently fall short on meeting my strategic objectives, or if it was just incredibly painful to get to where the targets that I was trying to reach, I'd probably start at the basics and look at my org chart and see, am I structured in a way that supports the work, right?
Yeah, that's true. I had this, like, I was trying to figure out how to put a visual up while we were talking, and I just never got there. I think this was like this week and the last week are one of the first weeks where I didn't try something new in this restream space. So I don't have a visual to describe what was in my head, but I can describe the visual. And when I thought about organizational charts, I thought about communication, right, and the flow of information, right, and the assumption that certain levels in the org chart can receive and handle, right, certain types of information. And it can feel, at least I think from interpretation, it can seem a lot of the times an org chart can convey one way, right, communication. Unless they're like you and they describe, right, this idea of an inverted pyramid where actually the information is also supposed to go up, and it's not just escalations, it's feedback, right? And that feedback actually drives, how the how the organizational structure is executed. But the visual I had in mind was like there's one person speaking, and depending on your organizational structure, there's, you know, a multitude of people receiving. And what is sent out isn't necessarily received by those different people, right? And in the same way, right? And the complexities of communication um, within any organizational structure, and kind of the importance. And I think this is a takeaway for people who might be watching now. I think Johanna's on here, right? But those that might watch it later, um, right? The importance of like following up and confirming understanding. And I think that's like a direct line to this idea that we've been talking about from the beginning, and the connection between organizational structure, right, and culture. Because if you aren't taking the time to follow up, if you aren't taking the time to confirm understanding, especially if your communication structures follow, right, your flow, you know, of structure, you could be establishing cultural norms that are working against how you want to operate, you know, without even realizing it. So there's like this need, maybe I think you described it, feedback loop, right? There's this need to um, almost like walk your org chart, not just stay in your spot, right? You need to, you know, almost like a Pac-Man, like walk the channels of your org chart and check up on them, right? And foster them, not just sit in your spot on the org chart, you know, as it relates to culture and how you're managing.
And there's a lot of variables at play that impact communication, but I think that we as leaders can take um, time, and it can be hard to invest the time. I want to be very upfront about that, but if your staff or receivers of your communication truly understand your intent and trust you, it's so much easier to communicate in this digital age, because so much communication is lost when you're using an electronic medium to communicate across, even one-on-one, but especially across a group. You know, you can start with something like a FaceTime or Teams or Skype or Zoom, whatever. So you can at least pick up on body language, but a lot of times people have their camera off, right? And then you've got email, which allows you to type your communication in maybe a little bit more robust way. But then you've got text messages that have very little tone. There's definitely no body language. And so if you're using communication electronically, I think it's super important to also understand that there's an investment in the infrastructure to be able to communicate that way as a leader. So when people don't have tone to fall back on, they know where you're coming from.
Yeah. You know, a while ago, we dug into one of our first conversations was about stories and the impact of stories on culture, or the impact of stories on the organization. And I think stories also play a part in the success of your org structure as well, right? And I think there's a connection there, right? Are stories being told, you know, that reinforce hierarchy, right? Or stories being told that reinforce empowerment? And I don't think hierarchy is needs to be linear, right? I think there's, like I was talking about earlier, there's substructure, right, and subculture in that space as well. But I think it's a choice for leaders, right?
I do think it's super important to clarify expectations as it relates to the positional power of an organizational chart. I think there's ways that you can
I don't understand. Like, what does that mean? Like, clarify expectations for who?
Um, so take, for example, say I've got a handful of direct reports, but the expectations of the work that I'm meant to deliver, as well as the risk that I'm supposed to take on and the decision making authority that I have, or even the budgetary authority that I have, is the same as my staff, right? That can create confusion. And sometimes I think it's just really important for positional power and authority to be defined in a way that people can understand, again, responsibility versus accountability, but also understand, where their empowerment and advocacy journey should begin for other people, so that way they can best do their job. Because it's sometimes it's not appropriate to delegate your decision making authority downward, and it's not not appropriate to delegate your risk downward, right?
Yeah.
And so going back to, and I'm trying to think positively, because I feel like I started off kind of negatively about bashing the org chart of the cultural web model. I was bashing org charts as not being my favorite thing on the cultural web model. But it can be a means of clarity as well, right? And
Absolutely.
it can be extremely frustrating if you're like, I'm doing my
followed.
boss's job. Like, the same things are expected of me as my boss. Why am I not, getting that paycheck? Or why am I not having that budget? Or why am I not having that authority? Right.
And that's a tough balance, especially if people don't have, on paper experience, but they want to get that
Yeah.
experience. How are they going to get it without doing it, right?
Yep.
And I think to your point, it's not delegate and then walk away. You can delegate maybe some of the riskier items, but you should be there to take the heat should it go in a bad direction. Right?
Maybe at some point we talk about on-the-job training, shadowing, reverse shadowing. Maybe we talk about coaching and mentorship, because I think, again, another thing about the org chart, you were alluding to this before as well, is career growth, right? It's on us as leaders, the higher up you are on an org chart, to invest,
to develop
the development of your people. And it's not on your staff to just be solely responsible for their own development. So I think it's really important as well to think about, how do you mitigate risk for your staff so they can gain that experience and they can learn, and you're not necessarily putting them into a spot of where they're going to fail.
Yeah, it's a great call out, man. That's a great call out. Yeah, almost like an incubation, like an incubator for them, right? Yeah. If you were, I'm trying to think of some of the common challenges, especially as it relates to this idea of like organizational structures and culture, and really like what I think what oops, I bumped my ironing board. I bumped my ironing board table.
I know that table very well.
I think. I think one of the challenges, with I think organizational charts and as a leader is thinking about what you want to, right, how you want to live it out, and from a values standpoint is how you want to live it out, aligned with where the organization's at.
Yeah.
And then from there, kind of coming up with a plan, because I think that's kind of the cultural connection and having that conversation with yourself and that question. And I think that's kind of the squishy, right? Hey, I'm in this organizational structure, this space, and this is how I see this being like modeled and organized within my team. And then is that in alignment with where the organization's going and how they interpret? Because if there's misalignment, right, that has to be kind of talked through and figured out. I think the other piece, which is a little less squishy and more kind of tactical, is an agency's strategic plan and how they measure and manage performance, right? And just kind of goal setting within an organization. And I think that's probably what you were speaking to with the clarity, right? If you have a really solid organizational structure and the organization and the culture is aligned to that, then you're probably going to be successful in getting to your executing your goals and meeting your performance expectations. Right. And I think that's the return on investment for, I think, a leader or a leadership team and organization is ultimately, if your culture is aligned to your organizational structure, that means you're going to be productive. That means that you're going to meet your goals. That means that you're going to be able to execute on your strategic plan versus it being just a piece of paper, right, that you put up on a wall and meet for a couple of weeks to put together, but yet it never gets talked about again.
Yeah.
Same with values. So I think that's the what's the word, the proof in the pudding, right? That's the the reward, for lack of a better word, by spending some time making sure those things are connected.
Can we just take a second to reflect on some of the best ways to reinforce that is through things like symbols and rituals and all the other good stuff that we talked about in the culture.
Or bringing pies.
I do like to bring pies.
I'm going to try to fit that in, I think, every episode, that the fact that, like, I don't think I've had a pie from you or a bite of one of your pies, Stephen, in a long time. And when I think about the culture of our friendship and the matrixed, situation with this live that we do, this podcast, I don't see equal distribution of resources.
It's weird that you say that, considering when you had no place to go. Where are you taking this live from?
See?
My house.
See?
My house.
No, hold on a second. Your house, but no pie.
You have access to my family.
This is the operational structure, OS, not lining up with the culture.
I think we should do a live on needy friendships. I'm sorry, on needy friendship. I'm sorry, my house and family aren't enough.
Even my lovely, amazing wife, Johanna, said yes, pie. And Tammy's on now. Tammy knows. She's had Stephen pie. And it is a cultural symbol. It's a story. It's representative of power dynamics.
I'm just saying.
I feel like I was.
If you ever want to work for me again, I recently brought in chocolate cake for my team.
Stephen, I told you I'd be your administrative assistant any day.
Okay.
All kinds of spicy, Tammy.
We like to. I think it's nice to just be authentic on here from time to time. For those, I think everybody here has witnessed how Brian and I interact with each other, especially in person. But there's a lot of sarcasm, and I think spicy is probably a good word. Picking on each other.
Spicy. There's another Tammy word, rumble.
That's a very Tammy word.
But it makes me think of crumble, and then makes me think about the fact that I still don't have pie.
I mean, you are one door away from my kitchen. Go make yourself a pie.
Johanna puts in parentheses, goes to make a pie. Oh, that's funny. I think that this idea of organizational structures is it can come across as fundamental, super simple, man, but I think it can be earth-shattering if it's mismanaged.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I think any of the topics we've talked about in the cultural web model, I mean, they're all such strong variables with a correlation to strong culture, right? Essentially meaning if you're weak in one area, it's directly going to impact the needle movement on your culture. And it is important.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things we like to promote, I should say the main thing that we try to promote here, is creating a community for leaders to talk about the hard stuff. And sometimes it can be really uncomfortable to own your level of authority and your own positional power. I mean, like, I personally don't take myself very seriously, but I do take protecting my team incredibly seriously, and I take our strategic objectives very seriously. And so sometimes it's important to acknowledge that a hierarchy exists. Now, how you go about doing your job within that hierarchy can create some pretty powerful cultural norms. at the end of the day, right, people are accountable for certain levels of results and certain level of risk, and you've got to do what you got to do that job.
When we started this series, we started it because of the idea of
look at her getting her digs in.
Dang. Hannah's spicy in the chat. Tammy, there you go. She just laid out the red carpet for you. When we started out this work, we talked about the idea of measuring the immeasurable.
Yep.
And there's things like morale and stories. They're just like you can't put them in a quantitative space, right? A numbers tick mark tracking space, right? They're things you actually have to go out and see and inventory and learn and understand about, and to actually truly, quote unquote, measure culture. And so we kicked off this cultural web model to give you, as a leader, ways to measure culture. And to your point, Stephen, I think there's so much interconnectedness. I think if you start with one, it's going to lead to other things, right? You're going to gain insights into organizational charts. You're going to gain insights into stories and symbols and how those impact you. And because if I'm a leader, right, and I'm listening to, like, say I decide to watch the whole series, and I'm like, gosh, I've got to measure stories. I've got to measure org chart. I've got to measure rituals and routines and symbols. It's like, no, not necessarily. Like, go with one, right? Start simple. Go inventory the stories. And I say stories because they're the first thing that people hear when they walk in the door. Watch out for so-and-so. Don't talk to this person. Oh, this person's really hard to work with, right? And so, like, those stories that you hear when you first started in an organization, those have been likely perpetuating for a long time. Yeah. And then the thing you have to ask yourself as a leader, right, is that what I want to perpetuate? Is that what I want to be in place? And I'm not saying don't vent, don't work through, right? But I'm saying pay attention. And again, if you inventory those stories, it will likely lead to other areas of awareness and understanding. And I think that's the power of this model. I think if you start with any one of these things that we're talking about, it'll give you a way to measure the immeasurable. It'll give you a way to measure culture. So, brand new leader, right? Maybe you're new to an organization. Pick one of these things to look at. Look at the org chart. Is the org chart and how it's laid out actually what you're seeing play out with decision making and how people communicate and how people hand off work? And you'll start to understand, like, oh, like you'll have a baseline from which you then can reflect upon in terms of where you want to go.
I would even take it a step further back and say, as a new leader, look,
you can't take anything a step further without pie.
Oh my gosh, I'm over this friendship. Think about.
Did you say take it a step further back or forward?
Before you even look at culture, if you're a new leader, look at everything that you're accountable for and assume that you know how to do it best and try and do it on your own. And just use
what? Wait, hold on a second. Repeat that again.
If you're a new leader and you want to,
is that a joke?
Well, no, this is a measuring tactic, right? So
okay.
Your baseline would be, you come into your role, you assume you know everything better than everyone else, and you try to execute on the results that you're accountable for. Use that as like the very bottom of how difficult it's going to be to get your job done, right? You want to talk about measuring the immeasurable. Sometimes I think going back to the basics, which is, hey, my organization is responsible for these key performance indicators, these strategic metrics.
Oh, and then trying to do it all of that on your own.
Right.
Got it. Yeah.
But the second that you start empowering people, right? The second you start correcting stories, the second that you start creating productive rituals and routines, the second you start restructuring your org chart to support those strategic work that you're accountable for, you will be able to measure whether it's through your own emotional exhaustion or just your ability to be able to deliver on results. culture,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's a great call out. I remember when I was and I wish I remembered this more often because I think it connects to what you just shared. I was a brand new manager, new to this idea. This was, I can't believe it. I was reflecting upon this the other day. It was almost 20 years ago, Stephen, that I was like starting and managing
Yeah.
people. 2 decades, right, of managing teams. And I'm still learning stuff today.
Oh yeah.
Still learning, like, oh my gosh, I I'm now a better leader because I experienced this thing, right? It's like I don't think you ever stop learning and growing. But I remember reading books. I'm like, I'm gonna be the best manager ever. I'm gonna study. I just want to do right. And one of the things in the book that I still remember to this day, I probably said it in another live. I'll probably keep saying it because it's so important. And that's, you're only as strong as the people that work for you and with
Mm-hmm.
you.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think you can do it on your own, I think that's a fool's errand. Right. I think you are only as strong as your people. And so when you look at your org chart, it's not an organizational structure. Right? Yes, it's probably visually top down, but it's almost like the people are the foundation, right, in which the success of the organization rests on.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many books out there about, you know, how to start your first 90 days, how to develop yourself as a leader. But I think it really boils down to you should always come in with an immense amount of humility and approach, especially your early conversations, with just active listening. And
Can you define active listening for folks?
yeah, I mean, active listening is beyond just in one ear out the other. I mean, you're paying. You're,
So hold on. When I asked for pie, did that go
I
in
was
one ear and
actively
out the other?
listening. I just don't care. Um,
Okay.
uh,
Okay. So
because
there's a difference between active listening and
I
actually
mean,
active
yeah, I
listening
mean,
doing something.
you go into that conversation not just listening to the words that are coming out of somebody's mouth, but you're trying to read between the lines as well. You're trying to take this all in,
Sure.
looking for opportunities. You know, right, and making sure that people feel heard when they're talking to you, I think is really important. Um, but somebody can have all the experience in the world, and I guarantee you they have something to learn from somebody else. And if you come in with a heavy hammer in an organization, assuming that you know how to run it best, and you're brand new to that organization as a leader, you're setting yourself up to fail.
But the org chart says I can.
Yeah, org chart says you can do a lot of things. The whole point of this is, should you? Should you?
Should you?
Mm.
It's deep, man.
I don't know about that.
You should make me a pie.
Should I? How many pies have you made me? How many pies have you made me?
Sorry, it's
Yes.
breaking up, Stephen.
I mean, if this is your variable on defining friendship, let's just call it out.
No, I think I'm really just hungry right now. No, that's a great call out, man. I think it just ties back to the idea of like taking a moment to look at what's in place, and to your point, evaluating it and asking that question: should you, right, keep going with what's there, or should you change it? And I think that's, again, there's almost like this tension between um, things that you can wrap your hands around, right, and hold. Sorry. There's this tension between what you can hold your put your arms around and like grab, and what you can't. Um, and sometimes, especially in these immeasurable spaces, you almost have to do things without being able to grasp them.
Yeah. I mean, again, thinking about leadership community and supporting each other, there's going to be times where you have to make decisions that come from the top down, where it's I disagree, but I'll commit to having to make that decision because I'll support the organization. That can be really hard. Sometimes you have to make decisions quickly without being able to collaborate, and sometimes you may not necessarily have been able to invest all the time yet to develop that full amount of trust across those that report directly to you, right? And so I think it's just really important to be aware of the impact of decision making power within an org structure, because sometimes the decisions you make will rupture your culture a little bit, and you have to be intentional about repairing. And it's a lot harder to repair than it is to rupture.
I didn't hear that last part, man.
I can't tell if you're just messing with me. It's a lot harder to repair than it is to rupture your culture.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But
a lot harder to repair.
Yeah, than it is to rupture.
Than it is to rupture.
Like trust is easily broken, right? But it can take a long time to gain.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Well, we have 14 minutes left. If you're just joining us, or if you've just been with us for a bit, we're talking about organizational structures, measuring the immeasurable, like in terms of culture and how culture connects to organizational structures. We like to create space towards the end for any kind of questions that you have, anything you want to engage with us on that you've heard. So we'd love your questions if you want to pop them in chat. If not, Stephen and I will hang out here for a few minutes, and then we'll conclude our time for tonight. So any questions on this subject of culture? It could even be about something that you just want to ask in the leadership space, something that's on your mind that you would love to just build, leverage this community. And those that are on, please feel free to respond as well to things that people put in chat. But if you have any questions, we'd love to hear them or comments.
Tammy doesn't know this, but I'm looking at her, expecting her to put something in the chat.
I know. Johanna said pie crust recipe. Dude, I think we need to change our lives, Stephen.
I don't know. I would just tell Johanna to ask her husband for his pie crust recipe for all the pies that he's made me.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, me either, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah. That's not our org structure, though.
Used to be.
Yeah, things change. I've made some decisions.
It's actually fun. Without putting names out there, we have listeners whom have worked for me at one point who are now big wigs themselves in these high up leadership positions. It's fun to watch these folks grow in their career and see them kind of take on their own leadership mentality and their own cultural norms. And I love that. I just love watching people grow.
Yeah. I think that ties in well to what we've been talking about today, right? The aspect of development, and developing people so they can feel like they can see themselves at some point in another part of the org chart. So Tammy asked, what was the number one lesson you learned the hard way? And she's like, who is that? That's sarcasm in written form.
Yeah, that's fair.
Just to help.
Brian, you start. What was the number one lesson you learned?
Oh, man. Gosh. Brand early on in my career, transferred to a store. I think this is just, I hope people can relate to this and feel like any mistake that they've made is okay after I share this story, because it was pretty bad. And I was in a store, brand new, right? making sure that people understood that, I'm the manager, right? And decades ago. And I walked up to the person and said, I know I'm new around here, but I need you to get back to work. Right? And it was like, I just want everybody to know, brand new, and it never nothing like this ever happened again. Like I learned my lesson, and I come to find out that she was sharing this lady was sharing like something that her mom had gotten sick, and she was just kind of expressing like where she was
Oh
at.
no!
I know, and I was like, oh man, like yeah, exactly, like foot and mouth moment, and that it just made me understand like that's where like now when I see these comparisons between leadership and management, I understand what the difference is. Like you can manage people all day long and check the box, make sure they complete all their tasks, but you need that leadership component, which I think we've spoken to in depth today, to really kind of like balance that out. And it's not about one or the other. I think it's about the right mix of both in the right moments, right? And I think the org chart looks like straight lines on a piece of paper, but it's really fuzzy, especially when you overlay leadership and management within that space.
Absolutely. I think for me, man, I've learned a lot
Do
of
you
lessons.
do you feel better like after hearing my story? Like
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
yeah,
Pretty bad.
exactly. I hope so.
I mean, I've made thousands of mistakes, right? And that's experience. But I'm actually going to tie this back to something because we've got a lot of new leaders who listen to this podcast, and that is I'm not somebody who normally likes to talk about themselves, but you will find when you take on a new role, maybe even a non-leadership role, that there can be this feeling of imposter syndrome. Like I landed this job and maybe I'm not capable of doing it. And, it was a big step for me. Right. And I think one of the most important things that leaders can do is one, have a community that's safe to be a sounding board, but two, believe in yourself and your ability to do the job. And I think that also comes back to interviewing. If you're interviewing like you're somebody that you're not, then you're probably not going to be the right fit for that job if you get the job. You should be authentically yourself. You should show up confident in your ability to do the job with enough humility to know that you can learn on the job. And the sooner that you can be confident in your ability to do that job, the sooner people will follow, right? Because they'll look to you. They'll realize there's cracks in the foundation if you show those weaknesses. And frankly, leadership is really hard in a professional. Everybody is a leader in some way, shape, or form. But a lot of people don't want a leadership position. But for me, like, it's what I love the most about working is being able to develop people and culture. But it is hard. And the decision making can be really hard, be really stressful. So you got to be kind to yourself. You got to believe in yourself, and you got to have a community that believes in you as well.
I love that, man. I thought you were going to say the hardest lesson you learned was not making me a pie.
Hardest lesson I learned was introducing myself to you like 12 years ago.
Dang, dude. Oh, that's awesome. Well, on that note, thanks for spending time with us. We look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. We are going to be off next week, but we'll be returning the week after. And we will have a new day and time, which will be announced. We're kind of calibrating with just different life stuff. We have life obviously outside of this, and so we'll be making some adjustments.
And
so
it should be said on the live that I love you, buddy.
What's that?
It should be said on the live that I love you, buddy.
Oh yeah, thanks, man.
I don't want you to cry all the way back home.
No, I only cry when I don't get pie, Stephen. Let's be clear. All right. Good night, everybody.